Hi guys, I'm Gasha. Welcome to the channel and welcome as always to our coffee times. So today I have a very special video for you. As you can see by the title, this is going to be a book tag. So I was thinking the other day, what kind of videos can I do? What do I feel like filming? And then I got this idea, and as you can see by the title, this is going to be the books that made us tag.
It's coffee time!
So obviously, you guys, I got this idea from the Netflix series that started with The Toys That Made Us, and they have expanded to The Movies That Made Us, and I absolutely freaking love that show. It doesn't have many episodes, but every time there's a new season I just binge through it, and it just gives us, you know, kind of like an insight of different toys and movies that have influenced our childhoods, and kind of like the story behind them and how they were created and all of that. And I've always loved that series so much, and I started thinking, you know, there are also books that one way or another have influenced us, have made us become a little bit what we are today. Perhaps, we don't know, but all of the things that we read and we watched when we were kids or even adults are kind of shaping us into the person that we are. And so I just decided to make a fun little tag of only 10 questions to talk about books that one way or another had an impact in our lives. Some of them are going to be older books that we read when we were young, and other ones are going to be new books that we just discovered recently. So let's get to the questions. The first one is, first book that you remember reading and being able to relate to. And for me, that is going to be a book by Gabrielle Hazer. I have mentioned this book on my channel before. I do not think there is an English title. The original was German, so I'm just gonna put a cover of the German and the Spanish version that I have here. For me, it was called in Spanish Jacobo no es un pobre diablo, and I related to this book so much. It's one of the first books that I really remember having a lot of thoughts about and really relating to it and wanting to read it over and over again. It is about a very small albatross that he is different from all other ones. He's not able to fly, he cannot dive or swim, and so he is kind of the outcast of the group. But he does have other talents. He is very happy, optimistic, and friendly, and he's also a really good singer. But that is not enough, because part of being an albatross is being able to fly. So he is given a deadline of 1 year by the council of like the older albatross, and he needs to be able to learn to fly in that year. And I think this book, it just connected with me because I've always felt different from, you know, very early on in my childhood. And I could connect with our main character because he was different from everybody else, and you know, the community, instead of embracing him for who he was and the talents that he did have, was kind of trying to force him and shaping him into be exactly like everybody else. And I think reading a book with such strong messages when I was a kid was something that I could really relate to, and I think that's why I really enjoyed it. Number 2 is first book that made you think about the world, in the sense that you started to consider bigger things in the world and life. And for me, that would be The Little Prince. I got this book as a present, I believe back in '92, more or less, and a teacher gave it to me. And I remember reading this book and loving it so much. And I think it's a book that it has no age, is ageless. You can read it at any age and you will always get something from it. The main story is an airman that lands stranded on a desert, in which he finds this little prince, and the prince starts to tell him stories about his travels and his life and stuff. But the main message is a lot of reflections about life, and it has so many kind of good messages and things that are gonna make you think for yourself and question the bigger questions in life. And it's just an experience that I believe everybody has a different kind of take on the stories that the prince tells, and a different take on the messages, because it depends also on your own personal experiences in life and friendships and all of that. But I think it's a book that everybody should read at least once. And it's definitely a book that made me think about the bigger picture. And apart from this one, I could mention Sophie's World is another one that I really loved, and it kind of helped me to introduce myself to a little bit to the world of philosophy, and I really loved it for it. And yeah, I think those are the two books that more or less kind of were the ones that really made me think about bigger things. Number 3 is first horror book that really got you extremely hooked and you could just not stop reading it, basically. And it's a book that I have mentioned in my previous video about this horror tag, but I had to mention it again because it is truly the first one that I remember not being able to put down, and that is Needful Things by Stephen King. We are in Castle Rock, and this new shop called Needful Things opens, and everybody in town that goes in there finds something, some amulet, some collectible that they have been wanted since forever. They all find something that they really need or really want, and in exchange they only have to perform a small deed that can be like a small prank, something that seems very innocent, but that ends up putting the whole town kind of in a position where they start to go against each other and perform acts of violence. I really love this book. I know I've talked about it before, but this book is one of my favorites by Stephen King, and I do think that I read Pet Sematary before I read this one. I don't remember because that was many years ago, but this is the first one that I really remember reading where I just fell in love really hard with it and I just didn't want to go to bed because I just wanted to keep reading. Okay, I just wanted to know more, even though it's a chunky book, but definitely loved it. Number 4 is a YA or a middle grade book that you read as an adult that you absolutely loved and you became a fan of, basically. And for me, that would be Harry Potter. So the first Harry Potter book was published in 1997, and I think I was aware of Harry Potter as a book in 2000. I was finishing my high school and I went to England for a month to Harrow to study at university there for a month, and I got to meet other people, and some girls were reading Harry Potter, and every bookstore had Harry Potter outside in the windows and displays. And so that's when I really realized, you know, there is this book called, you know, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and that's when I started reading it, and I got so addicted to this series, to this book series. And despite the recent events and what has happened with J.K. Rowling in Twitter and her horrendous comments and how much I despise all the things that she has said, Harry Potter is still gonna be something that I adore, even though it's very problematic and there are many things that, you know, could have been made better, but it still has a lot of nostalgia for me, and I still enjoy the characters. And I'm not gonna let her spoil that for me, but I'm not gonna support her as an author anymore in any way. So yeah, that's my little rant right there. Number 5 is a new favorite horror author that you discovered in the last years. If you don't read horror, then just pick any other genre. For me, that would be Richard Lehman, since I read Endless Night. This just made me fall in love with him, his writing, and how disturbed his mind is and how messed up it is. Basically, all of his books have all trigger warnings. There's a lot of trigger warnings in all of the books that I have read by him. In this particular book, we are following Jodie. She's a teenager having an apparently regular, normal, innocent sleepover at her friend's house when a couple of strangers break into the house, kind of like a home invasion situation. And even though she manages to escape while most of the other ones that were in the house were brutally murdered, her problems actually start by surviving that night. And it was just so disturbing, so messed up, and it kept on changing and getting weirder and weirder, and I loved every bit of it. And you know, all the books that I have read so far by Richard Lehman I have loved in, you know, more or less, but I really enjoyed all of them so far. There has not been one that I have like DNF'd or hated or something like that. So for me, he is now an author that I'm trying to collect all his books from and trying to read them, because it's just, you know, something that I think his writing is really meant for me. Number 6 is a book that combines two things that you really love and therefore became also one of your favorite books, and that is Rabbit in Red by Joe Chianakas. Now, this book was so good. It kind of combines games in a way with horror. It is basically the Ready Player One for horror fans, and I absolutely loved Ready Player One so much. And this book is just also kind of for every person that loves horror movies. The main plot in the book is that there is this company that is going to select 17 teenagers that have to pass a test, and the test is answering you know, questions related to horror films. So the people that know the most about horror movies are going to be selected to play a game in which they can win cash to be able to make their own movies and things like that. And so 17 teenagers are being taken to this kind of remote location, and they are being put to the test to test their horror movie knowledge. In order to solve puzzles, you know, in order to escape, things like that. So this was just perfect if you love horror movies. Honestly, this book is fantastic and a book that I would also reread anytime. Number 7 is the book that unexpectedly hit you in all the feels. And this is a book that I've also mentioned a lot on my channel, obviously, you know, in this book tag, because it's about books that have had an impact in our lives in one way or another. That, you know, you might have heard about these books before in my channel, but that is T. Carter, I Stopped Somewhere. I didn't know when I went into this book how much I was going to love it. I was expecting a book similar to The Lovely Bones, but this was everything The Lovely Bones was not for me. I really liked The Lovely Bones, the movie. The book was a little bit disappointing for me, but then I read this book which has a similar concept, and it just hit me so hard. It was so hard to read it, but it was also such a well-written story. We are following a girl that all her life has kind of been invisible to everybody, and she is now telling her story from the other world, so to say. From the beginning of the book, you know that she has been raped and murdered, and she's just telling you her story. So similar to The Lovely Bones, where the murdered girl is telling you her story, this is kind of like the same concept. But the way this book was written, it was just so strong and so heartfelt, and I just loved it so much, and I've been recommending it ever since I read it, because it has so much power, and I don't know why it hit me in all the feels, even though I cannot relate due to personal experiences with the main character, but it was just so emotional. So if you're looking for a really hard-hitting contemporary book and you enjoyed The Lovely Bones, I encourage you to take this book. Number 8 is a book that helped you go through a rough patch. So this is a non-fiction book called The Road of Tears by Jorge Bucay, and this is a book that I bought soon after I moved to Germany, and I started to go through a lot of really low moments in life, and I had to deal with grief and with loss in different levels. And this is a book that I've always reached out to when I needed a little bit of closure and to remind myself that, you know, I can make it through. It is a book that deals about how we can best deal with something that we have lost, or something that has changed in our lives and we are not used to this change yet, and we have to adapt again, how to move on after somebody has either left you because it was a personal choice or because they passed away. So it kind of helps you to see things in a different perspective. It kind of helps you to move on and to understand that things in life are inevitable sometimes, and you just have to learn how to deal with that grief and cry if you have to cry, but then at some point you just have to move on. And this is a book that I absolutely loved so much. And yeah, I still have a copy, but it's somewhere buried in my non-fiction section. So I didn't pull it up for you guys, but this is a book that if you are somebody that has a tough time dealing with loss, I think you would really find it useful. Number 9 is an autobiography that you have read that you could totally relate to. And for this, I'm going to be picking up You're Never Weird on the Internet by Felicia Day. She is telling the story of a girl that when she was young, she was interested in things that were not considered girly things, like video games, comics, role-playing games, all of those things, computers, all of those things. And I could totally relate to her and myself. I have been considered not a real nerd or a real gamer just because I'm a female, and that is sadly how it was back in the day. I don't think it's like that so much anymore, but there are many situations that I could totally see myself in that she was explaining, and the struggles of being a woman with this type of interests back then, and the industry and how they treated her when she went to like castings, interviews and things like that as well. And I think that even though this book is showing ugly faces of how it was for her to grow up like this, it's also a message of empowerment for women, and it always leaves every chapter in a positive note, even though she's telling you stories that are kind of negative. But yeah, I could really relate to her because me, like her, I'm a big nerd, in case you have not noticed. And the last one, number 10, is a book that you read, and while you were still reading it, you knew you had to reread that, because it was connecting with you at such a level, because you were loving it so much. And that for me is a book that I read recently, and that is Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. This is a book that definitely had an impact on me because I feel like it was made for horror fans, for horror lovers. Books or movies, it doesn't really matter. It's just for people that just love horror. And it was so amazing to read this book and to see so many different subgenres of horror being portrayed in the book. There is slasher, there is supernatural, there is a little bit of everything. And the main plot of the book is that a group of horror authors have been invited to a supposedly super haunted house to spend the night and to give interviews. So when they're in this house, they realize that there's something weird, something feels not right inside of this house, and throughout the book they will be confronted with their worst fears. And it's a book that is super dynamic, it's changing all the time, and the characters are super lovable. You kind of feel for them, you root for them, and they couldn't be more different from each other, which is something that I also really appreciated, that you got a little bit of the background of each writer, and you really got to know them at the end of the book. And yeah, it's one that definitely it's going to become one of my favorite books of all times, and probably one that you will see me talking a lot of in my channel, so I'm sorry not sorry. But definitely one that I just felt it was targeted for horror lovers, and that's who I am. And those were the 10 kind of prompts slash questions that I came up with for this tag. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you have fun if you decide to make it yourself as well. I'm going to leave the 10 questions slash prompts down below in case that you want to do it yourself. If you do, please come back and leave me a link down below of your video so that I can check it out. We all have had so many different experiences with books that it's going to be super interesting to hear you guys' answers and to see which books have kind of had an impact in your life or have kind of helped shaped you in one way or another. I know, I think it's super interesting because we all come from really different backgrounds, different countries, different types of childhood. So I think this is going to be like super interesting to see what everybody else's choices are going to be for the 10 questions. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you want to follow me in other social media, all the links as always are down below for you, and I hope to see you all in the next coffee time. Bye.